Nintendo is perhaps my favorite game company. I grew up playing games like Super Mario Sunshine and the Mario Galaxy series, and for the most part, I love what they've been doing with the Switch as well. We've made more than a few videos on that. They've made it very clear that they've put a strong emphasis on making great games first, and that makes me very happy. But at the same time, their aging practices as a company are beginning to show, and I'd like to discuss that today. This is an open letter to Nintendo. So obviously this is going to be a very subjective video, but after all, I am a massive Nintendo fan, so I'm going to try to do my best to criticize them within reason and use evidence to back up every point I make so that this doesn't come across as just like a hate piece. I would also like to say that many of the points that I'm about to make today have already been brought up by other content creators, but the point of today's video is to kind of just organize all these thoughts into one cohesive video. With that out of the way, on to the first most prominent issue. So this should come as no surprise to anyone who has tried out Nintendo's online service for the Switch, but it sucks. Frequent rubber banding, constant input lag, and games completely freezing altogether are commonplace in a game like Smash Ultimate. Part of the blame goes to the poorly implemented BCM4356 chip inside of the Switch console, but the bigger issue has to do with Nintendo's online servers, or lack thereof. But before I get into that, let me briefly explain the difference between having dedicated servers versus using peer-to-peer networking. When a game has dedicated servers, that means that there are several physical servers spread across multiple regions in your country. When you join a game, your client connects to the nearest server to your location, and you're automatically paired with other people that are geographically closest to that specific server. When you send data, perhaps by moving in a game, that data has to be first sent to the server you are connected to before it can be sent to all of the other clients in the session. So naturally, this adds a little bit of latency, but with a sufficient amount of servers spread across a region, it works pretty damn well. So well, in fact, that it's actually used for extremely competitive games such as CSGO, which rely on really fast reactions and imperceptible input lag. So in short, dedicated servers aren't perfect, but they're pretty damn good, and the only major drawback is that they can be very expensive to set up and maintain, unless you're okay with having fewer servers and higher latency. On to peer-to-peer networking. This multiplayer solution doesn't really rely on having big expensive servers, or really servers at all. Essentially, the way that P2P works is that you cut out the middleman, aka the server, and the clients send all of their data directly to the other clients in the session. Thus, P2P has the potential to have even lower latency than dedicated servers can have, and it's very cost effective. However, that's not to say peer-to-peer networking is a perfect solution by any means. The biggest problem occurs when somebody in the session does not have a stable internet connection. Let me explain what happens in a game like Smash Ultimate, for example. When you play the quick play mode and queue for a 1v1, as long as you and the other client are relatively close geographically and both have stable internet connections, everything should be fine. But this perfect scenario doesn't happen too often. As I said before, the Switch's built-in Wi-Fi chip's implementation is terrible. So even if you are always using Ethernet but you happen to be paired with a player who isn't, chances are both of you will have a terrible experience and it could render the game unplayable. The worst part of all of this is that Nintendo has no system in place to detect that lag is severely impacting your game and prevent you from being punished for problems outside of your own hands. The quick play mode in Smash Ultimate uses a numerical ranking system called GSP, and even if lag plagues your game, your GSP will still increase and decrease the same. This removes any legitimacy of GSP being a real representation of your skill in the game, so much so that certain characters have kind of become meta as online characters because the input lag can be so bad that they become infinitely more difficult to react to. Anyways, I could rant about Nintendo's implementation of online play in Ultimate for hours. The point is, when you pay $20 a year for Nintendo's online service, you're not paying for dedicated servers like you would for Xbox and PlayStation. Essentially, you're only paying that annual subscription fee to access a handful of retro games and Nintendo's peer-to-peer services, which don't cost them a dime to upkeep. So my question to Nintendo is, why are you even charging for this service in the first place when it's so badly implemented? I'm not going to pretend like I'm an amazing Smash player or that I'm insanely invested in its community. I'm not by any means, but I have been trying to get better at the game lately, so I'm not completely detached from it. Anyways, with my limited experience with the game, I've already grown distasteful for the way Nintendo treats its competitive scene. Let me give you 2 examples to show you why. Number 1. Nintendo ran an official tournament last year where they decided to use the Squad Strike game mode of Smash and left items and final smashes on, but decided to turn off stage hazards. If you're even remotely aware of the competitive scene of Smash, you'd realize that this is not close to an official competitive rule set, and how it's kind of a joke that they turned off stage hazards just to appease people like me who are going to criticize them. My point here is that it's fine if Nintendo wants to hold more of these casual tournaments to target that more fun side of their games, but the real issue here is that they're trying to legitimize these as real competitive events, which I feel is kind of equivalent to just ignoring the competitive scene as a whole. On to example number 2. Nintendo has tried to openly cover up the fact that their online service is heavily flawed by giving out false information in a clip from a live stream. Watch this clip.
As you guys know, during this viewing, you might see a little bit of a slowdown or buffering, but do not worry. The players aren't seeing that. That's not affecting them, and that will not affect the VODs afterwards, of course. A lot of levers and pullers being switched right now.
In that clip, the commentator just stated that the viewers might experience some lag during the live stream, but the players will not experience any of that. But that's not what the players had to say. I just see this as really low of Nintendo because instead of just owning up to the fact that their online service is flawed, they'd rather lie to their viewers. I also feel like it's just disrespectful to the esports scene, but anyways, there's so many more examples I could give. On to the next point. This is going to be the most subjective thought that I talk about in this video, but hear me out. 2 examples in the past year come to mind where Nintendo has openly said that they are done supporting a game. Now normally that wouldn't be a problem. It's completely natural for a game developer to step away from a game if it's starting to die down a little bit or the game's been out for a really long time. However, lately Nintendo has been completely ignoring these criteria and prematurely killing some of its games. The biggest offender in recent history has to be Super Mario Maker 2. For reference, Mario Maker 2 was a pretty big game in the United States alone, but more impressively, it sold over 4 million copies worldwide, which is more than enough fuel to keep the game going for years to come. However, the game was released under a year ago, and Nintendo has already decided that they are done with the game by issuing a statement that the most recent update was the last final free update. It just bewilders me that they're already choosing to move on from this game because it still has a sizable player base and it would be so easy to add little updates every now and then. This kind of ties in with a bigger issue. Nintendo kind of seems to be obsessed with big updates and big reveals, so they must have already ran out of motivation or big ideas. I just don't quite understand the development approach when you see games such as Minecraft that can be big successes for as long as they have been and can continually offer additional updates as long as the player base is there. Whatever. The other example that comes to mind is Splatoon 2. This game is a little bit older, mind you, but it did come out in July of 2017, so it's not that ancient. Splatoon still has a very active player base and is Nintendo's only online multiplayer shooter game, yet last July they chose to roll out the final Splatfest, which is an in-game event that usually builds up a little bit of hype in the community. These events were ridiculously easy to program, so much so that they were kind of indistinguishable from one another, but regardless they did build up hype for the game, but Nintendo chose to cut support without warrant, and that's all I have to say about that. I thought I'd throw this section here and at the end because I don't want to only put negativity out in the world, and I do respect Nintendo in a lot of other ways. First of all, I think that Nintendo Directs are amazing. The fact that, every few months you're going to hear about what Nintendo's working on and what's to come is really exciting. Waiting to hear the next Smash Fighter announcement, or in my case, waiting to hear more about that damn Breath of the Wild sequel, is really cool and it keeps the anticipation going. It's also a really cool and intimate thing. I don't know of too many other game development companies that do something similar. The only downside to this is it probably puts a little bit of pressure onto Nintendo to always have something big to announce every couple months, but it doesn't seem like they're cracking too hard under that pressure. Several years ago, they announced the highly anticipated Metroid Prime 4, and after a disappointing amount of progress being made on the game, last January they actually were comfortable enough to tell all of their fans that they aren't able to meet the same release window that they had promised. I view this as highly respectable because it shows that they actually care about the quality of their games and the end product, and they're not solely focused on getting more games and more announcements out there. So that's really the thing that I give modern Nintendo the most credit for, really caring about the final product. They seem like they truly want to deliver games that live up to the hype, and every once in a while they make games that I think you could honestly consider masterpieces. One more note that I want to add to this video before we wrap it up is how Nintendo is listening to its community in different ways. They're obviously not doing too much about the online service, but in terms of adding fan-requested content to some of their titles, they seem like they're doing a pretty decent job. The DLC fighters chosen in Smash Ultimate seem to have a direct correlation with what its community is asking for, but I'm still waiting for Steve from Minecraft. Anyways, thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. Chances are if you made it all the way through, you're probably a pretty big Nintendo fan like us, so make sure to check out some of the other Switch videos on this channel. But that's it for today. We'll see you next week.